I'm taking probably one of the last sessions today, so thank you for bearing with us so far. My name is Andrew. I am a security enthusiast, so I take this kind of thing quite seriously. And I was asked to speak about cyberwarfare and threat hunting, and how it aligns to DFIR and things that we do from a DFIR perspective, essentially. So I'm not exactly going to jump into what we do as a company, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask me afterwards. Right. So let's go into it. Load shedding. We all remember the disruption that was caused in South Africa during the recent Stage 2 and Stage 4 blackouts, repeatedly stemming from a natural disaster, Hurricane Idai? How I pronounce it, I don't know. And it caused massive panic around the country's energy supply. Now, imagine for a second that somebody had hacked into Eskom's power grid, plunging South Africa into darkness and causing massive damage to the economy through lost working hours and shattered investor confidence. If a hacker was employed by another government to do that, would that be an act of war against South Africa? Here's another scenario for you. What if a political leader was in hospital for an operation, and someone altered their digital medical records, erasing the fact that they might be allergic to penicillin? If they were given that treatment, would that be an assassination attempt against that political person? In both cases, how would you tell the difference between a government or military-derived or directed operation and conventional profit or malice-driven cybercrime? Most importantly, how would you stop that? So, based on the talks that have happened today and yesterday, I altered this presentation a little bit late last night, and I decided to add this question in. And I actually want to pose this to you guys as well. So from a cyber warfare perspective, even if you're not an expert in cyber warfare, I'm definitely not an expert in cyber warfare. We deal with a lot of those kind of cases though. How ready do you think we are in South Africa? Why not? Why do you think we're not ready? Lack of skills, lack of opportunities, lack of actual understanding of the topic. So a guy that I know by the name of Haroon Mir, and I don't know if you've heard of him before, is a very, very clever guy. Essentially, he's a threat researcher and security geek who runs a little company called Things. He published an article in 2013, late 2013, early 2014, with regards to the Snowden leaks. And I've just taken sort of the headline about Silicon Valley and spy agencies and software sovereignty, and how the PRISM leaks that came out of the Snowden affair essentially showed how if you as a government or a country is reliant on another government or institution that isn't a sovereign institution for technology, how vulnerable you could be to cyber warfare, to your data being leaked out or stolen without you knowing it. And that QR code, by the way, takes you to my website, not the article, so please go click on it. No, I'm joking, that actually takes you to the article. And if you want to, it's a bit small, but I've got the URL there. I'm willing to share it to the article after this as well. And he also did a talk, and I tried to obfuscate it, Prof, so it doesn't conflict with your conference, but he did a talk a couple of years ago in 2014 on this specific topic and article that he wrote as well. So it is online, it's on Vimeo. That little QR code will take you there as well, but there's the URL. All right? I encourage you to go check it out. It's a really, really intelligent talk. And it goes on about things like, well, you've got a piece of Cisco kit. Okay? There's evidence that Cisco worked with the NSA to give them access to your infrastructure. All right? There's pictures online, there's evidence online, and this is all part of the larger cyber warfare issue out there, essentially. All right, so what are we talking about here is an invisible mounting threat of cyber warfare, where digital technology is used to cause harm to a nation, its government and people. The two examples I provided essentially are the two forms that cyber warfare can take, but there's many more as well, because the threat landscape is massive. And as government systems and our own systems are brought online, like digitized and networked, we stand even more risk because of that. So think about e-filing, biometrics at home affairs. If you go to home affairs and you get one of those little smart ID cards, you give your fingerprints, right? Where are your fingerprints stored? What is that associated with? Where is that linked? And what kind of information can I get my hands on if I can get access to that data? Passport control at airports, tracking who's going in and out of countries. We're rapidly approaching a smart grid and smart systems in South Africa with the increasing uptake of the Internet of Things, which allows us to do very clever things like monitor equipment remotely, digitize centrifuges like you'll see now, but essentially that threat landscape just expands with all of this technology that's out there. Is this going to work? That's not working. Oh, there we go. So I got a little bit of a clever video there about how we act, and it's not working. Awesome. Thank you, Demogod. Digital transformation of this promises greater speed, efficiency, cost savings, and even employee safety. But it also opens up entities embracing it, whether government, private business, or otherwise, to a whole new world of cyber attacks. Digitizing is good and well if those systems, but if those systems are neglected in terms of cyber information security, things can go horribly wrong as attackers exploit weak points for gain. Attacks are enabled by things like outdated software, like we've heard over the last day or so. And that really is one of the biggest things. I mean, patching is hard, people. Patching is really, really difficult. And if you are getting it right, I'd love to talk to you about it, because very few people are. Passwords, lax user passwords, lax user methods. Leaving your machines open and walking away from your desk. We've got a thing in our company where if we come across you and your desk and your machine is left open, oh man, we're having some good lunch here. So basically, if you think the private sector is exempt from cyber warfare incidents, think again. There is much to be gained from destabilizing a key economic sector like financial services or mining in South Africa. Imagine what kind of chaos that's going to cause. It's not just conventional profit-oriented cybercrime that companies have to worry about. The issue of cyber warfare or cyber terrorism is that with so much of it shrouded in murkiness, including who's responsible and their tendency to swiftly appear and disappear, it becomes very difficult to structure more conventional plans around how to stop them. I think these slides, oh, there we go. So what do I mean? Compare an Air Force bombing run against an electricity plant in a country, like Syria, for example. Compare that to a hack of that plant by an entity half a world away. The latter is much more quiet. It's operating in the shadows, anonymous, so it's very difficult to link it back to who actually performed the action. And it shows us that conventional rules of warfare, which focus on physical confrontations, territory invasions, and violence, don't apply when cyberspace is involved. Despite the far-reaching impact of cyber warfare, including on ordinary civilians, there are no formal rules of engagement yet. There are efforts for it, but being enforced is questionable. So moving away from hypotheticals to the first publicly known act of cyber warfare, and I'm not saying this is the first act of cyber warfare, it's one of the first known acts, and that's Stuxnet. Who hasn't heard of Stuxnet before? Everybody here knows what Stuxnet is. Okay, there we go. One guy, 2, 3. All right, so Stuxnet was a highly sophisticated worm, well, in the form of a worm, that was developed to essentially disable industrial control systems. So industrial control systems like the ones that are used in nuclear plants. Essentially, in this case, one of Iran's largest nuclear plants, Natanz. And what this thing did was, first of all, they suspect it got into the plant because the plant's air-gapped, right? The plant wasn't connected to the internet. So how do you get a piece of malware into something that's not connected to the internet? So it was planted allegedly by an infected USB drive, which is very commonplace. By the way, we've got a few USB drives lying around here. Please feel free to plug them into your computers. And the weapon essentially caused damage to the industrial system hardware, and it looked for the specific code that controlled the plant's centrifuges used to separate and enrich uranium. For months, it just basically sat there and caused those machines to intermittently spin out of control, and through the unnatural wear and tear, reportedly ruined 20% of that plant's and 1/5 of Iran's capability. Iran's nuclear centrifuges, not nuclear capability. Although there's been no confirmation around this, it has been linked back to the US and Israel. There has been some speeches and public statements stating that, yeah, we did Stuxnet. But it was used for geopolitical gain. It was used to prevent Iran's nuclear program, or at least put it back a couple of years, which it did. So what else is happening in the world right now? And I've just got a couple of examples over here. US-Iran conflict. All right, who hasn't read a news headline in the last couple of days with regards to Iran claiming that the US is hacking them, US is claiming that Iran's hacking them? Okay, that happens all the time. The fact that it's in the media right now is just because of some political event. US-China conflict and a third-party espionage. It was mentioned yesterday, but I'm not going to mention the name. By the way, if you've got one of those phones, I'm sorry. US-Russia conflict and election interference. Israel-Iran conflict. And this one's specifically very interesting because a couple of months ago, Israel bombed a Hamas cyber facility, or alleged Hamas cyber facility, because they found that that facility was used to hack into the infrastructure. Now you've got cyber warfare, not just in the cyber domain, but actually spilling into the physical domain as well. I just took a couple of headlines from around the world. So, Iran-backed hackers ransacked Citrix. If you use Citrix in infrastructure, I'm sorry. Antivirus makers, Symantec, Trend Micro, confirm and deny getting breached and having the data stolen. Apple, Oracle, VMware software hacked at Print-to-Own. Print-to-Own is a competition that's part of a larger security conference, and it's a really cool competition that basically, if you want to pitch up there, you enter, you get the ability to actually try and break a piece of software from one of these guys, and they will pay you. Personal data slurped in the Airbus hack. And then the last one, NASA, which was hacked by one of these little puppies. Okay, a little Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi obviously didn't do the hacking itself, but it was used to essentially create a tunnel back to the adversary's infrastructure, and they sat there for months just siphoning data. Okay, and it's actually not this big. This is just a case. The real board is very small. So if you've got one of these things and you're able to plug it into a piece of infrastructure or a network point, like behind a pot plant, for example, or a banner. By the way, if you're on the Wi-Fi, thank you very much. You have the ability to essentially take control or sit on an infrastructure for as long as you need to, whether the infrastructure is government, private, your home-based infrastructure, and 9 times out of 10, no one will really be able to detect you. Because if you have the capability of doing that, you've got the capability of hiding yourself very well as well. So traditional defense measures don't really cut it when it comes to 0 days. And what I mean by 0 day is that it's a new threat, it's a new piece of malware, it could be anything from a vulnerability that's being exploited in the wild or that they don't know of, to, I don't know, a type of phishing that's just been released. And that 0 day is essentially named after that because that's the day that it goes wild. That's the day that someone is actually able to exploit that vulnerability. And conventional defensive measures don't cut it because it's very difficult to detect those kind of things. How do you detect what you don't know what you're looking for? How do you detect that I've plugged a Raspberry Pi into your infrastructure? Or a piece of malware has been sent and you've never seen that piece of malware before. So that time to fix, the 0 day to fix time is crucial because companies race to get those patches out, companies race to find those pieces of malware, and in the meantime, the damage spreads like wildfire. So 2 examples of that. WannaCry and NotPetya. Melissa spoke about NotPetya yesterday. Who doesn't know what those were, by the way? Okay, cool. So NotPetya was actually allegedly also an act of cyber warfare that was disguised as ransomware for geopolitical gain. Okay, it was Russia acting against one of the Eastern Bloc countries. And unfortunately, because of the kind of exploit that it used, and I'll talk about irony now, it disabled a hell of a lot of infrastructure. NotPetya used a vulnerability, or one of the vulnerabilities it used to spread itself was released by the NSA. Okay, so now you've got a Russian adversary using American technology to cause havoc in the world. How cool is that? So we do need a good balance. Given this context, a more offensive approach to cybersecurity makes sense, performed in conjunction with defensive techniques. At a recent summit in Singapore, the US's General Paul Nakasone, thanks Manuel, Director of the National Security Agency and Head of US Cyber Command, spoke about defensive practices only being one side of the coin, with the other being persistent engagement. And that leads me to threat hunting. And this is probably not the ooh and ah of this presentation, but essentially, threat hunting is where the digital forensics and incident response side of it, for me, comes into play. And this is my theory around it. You might have a different one, and that's great. Willing to discuss it with you. So, threat hunting is a key to your arsenal if you are trying to secure an organization. If you're trying to secure government networks, private networks, or even your own network, and there's different aspects of it, such as forensic investigations. So when I say DFIR, digital forensics and incident response, we don't go as far as what Danny has gone, for example, with actually doing on-site forensic investigations. We're talking about the ones and zeros of logs, of connections, what is actually happening in an environment, and that's what is key to threat hunting. So it's used to fortify system security. Threat hunting is summed up as a proactive and iterative approach to digital security. Threat hunting is not a tool, it's an advanced cyber defense process that takes the fight to the hackers by continually considering their behavior. Now, over the last 2 days, you guys have kept being told, think like a hacker, think like an attacker. How would you break into your own system? And that is essentially one of the key methodologies behind threat hunting, is trying to find those threats within an environment, whether they're known or unknown, and fixing those threats, plugging those holes, but at the same time, looking for if anything has exploited before as well. And I might be running out of time, so I'm going to quickly skip over this, but essentially it involves practices like going beyond your network's boundaries, using the dark web. Who has used or gone onto the dark net, by the way? Anyone? Okay, cool, sweet. A couple of you, that's good. And you use those to get to grips of changing levels of attack. So you try and find new ways that your networks could be attacked, or your systems could be attacked, and you really think about creativity, because that's one of the key things to hacking as well. It's really a creative process. And you get good enough at threat hunting that you can actually start predicting how organizations can be hacked. So we view the capability as an important part of your strategy, right, or cybersecurity strategy, so to speak. We believe there's no such thing as being 100% secure, but you can try to get as close to 100% as possible. There is no silver bullet, okay, like what was said in one of the presentations yesterday. So imagine you've got a house, right? You want to keep it safe. You build a wall around your house, okay? Then you add an electric fence, maybe a guard dog, some CCTV cameras. You build up your different layers of defense so that that home is actually your company or your organization or your government network. Threat hunting uses all those principles and security layers to actually start finding those threats. And that's the way that we see defense in depth. And that's an easy analogy to start thinking about it. You've got your house, how do you secure your house? So it does involve a lot of offensive cybersecurity approaches, and I don't mean offensive as in like me calling someone fat. I mean offensive as in thinking like an attacker, to be honest. And the offensive security approach is also different from traditional cyber defense mechanisms. It requires a completely different way of thinking.
You have 2 minutes.
Thanks. So what do I mean? And I'm going to start wrapping up now. Things like antivirus, firewalls, and the likes. The onus is on the defender to always be perfect. So me as the defender, the blue team in an organization, I need to be right every single step of the way. One mistake that I overlook can let a cyber criminal in. With threat hunting, we flip that scenario around and we put the pressure on the adversary. They need to be right every single time. Basically, it forces us to start asking questions. Things like, Hey, why is notepad.exe trying to send email via Gmail? Why is notepad.exe trying to send email at all? You know, those are the kind of things that we start asking. We start looking for those artifacts and we start asking those questions. You're constantly considering that you are working from a situation of compromise. Everything is compromised. It's just, it takes time for you to figure that out and find the compromise, essentially. It's really good at identifying command and control callbacks, something that most security methodologies or technologies don't always find or get wrong. And that little blurb around, can you afford 100 days, that's based on some research that was done in 2017 and 2018. That's the general amount of time it takes companies to realize they've actually been hacked, or compromised, or whatever you want to call it. So for 100 days I'm sitting on your infrastructure, what can I do? You've got personally identifiable information, great, I'll start selling that. You've got server resources, great, I'll start selling those. I can create a botnet out of all your servers, or I can actually go after something like intellectual property, something that I'm really after, and start doing stuff with that. So you have to start asking those questions. And that's where red teaming these kind of operations really come into play. So what I mean by red teaming, that's the offensive side of things. That's the offensive security that we start looking at. And obviously, threat hunting, you need to ask those questions, like I said, you need to trawl through logs, and that takes a lot of time. So you can't expect someone to sit there 24/7 trawling through logs, for example. So that's where machines come in, and artificial intelligence and machine learning and whatever you want to call it. That stuff is great, but essentially it's all just data analytics. So we've worked out there's about a 60-40% human split between data analytics, between machine learning and humans, essentially. And it always comes down to the human, because machines still make mistakes. They're not perfect. Humans still make mistakes also. But essentially, if a machine flags something, the human needs to go check it out. Don't just take it for granted that, hey, that thing is safe, or hey, that thing is compromised. Machines do come up with false positives as well, all right? So, I mean, the primary, and I'm going to skip through these slides because I'm running out of time, the primary effect of threat hunting, thinking like a detective, like Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, Horatio Caine. Everyone's got their different methodologies around threat hunting, and it essentially doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just everybody gets to the same conclusion at the end of the day. Have you been compromised or not? Most likely you have been compromised. How were you compromised? That's the question. And then you start using those to build up your company defenses. So we've got a couple of functions here. I'm not going to go through this right now. And we have got the threat hunting loop that we utilize. If you have any questions regarding this, let me know. We can chat offline about it. Okay? So real life South African example, just before I run out of time, a client of ours who has given us permission to use this as an example. I'm not going to name the company name, but essentially it was a repeat ransomware attack that this client went under. And ransomware is a commodity threat, okay? You can go buy a piece of ransomware on the dark web for $5, you get it with an SLA behind it, guaranteeing that it's going to work, okay? Or money back guarantee. So we used some methodologies, and we were brought in by this client, and we actually found out that this client's own IT staff were working with third parties that, you know, gave these guys access to this client's network, which, you know, deals with a lot of personally identifiable information. And that's something called shadow IT as well, or a part of shadow IT for me. And interesting story. So these guys were compromised. They started rebuilding. It took them a week to rebuild. The weekend hit. Everybody was, hey, we're back in business. Happy days, right? Sunday night, they were hit again. Different piece of ransomware, same guys, because IT was working with them. So they knew they were rebuilt. They knew what the creds were. They essentially executed ransomware to cover their tracks as the second time. The first time, they sat on the infrastructure for a long, long time, siphoning data, doing whatever they wanted. And then they hit ransomware to cover their tracks as well. So yeah, ransomware is a commodity threat, but it's also used very cleverly sometimes. All right, great. So I just want to leave you with one quick thing, all right? Imagine this hypothesis. Imagine South Africa is hacked, but the power is still on. Imagine our telecoms and our financial services go down. And that downtime lasts for days and days and days. You can't phone anyone, you can't withdraw any money, nobody knows who's got what amount of money in the account, nobody even knows anything about your account. Imagine what kind of disastrous situation we would be in. So it brings me back to one of my first slides. How ready do you guys think we are from a cyber warfare perspective in this country? So I do have a Q&A slide, but I know there was going to be a panel. I just want to show one thing quickly, and one of the things that has been coming up over the last 2 days is skills, or a lack of skills in this country, or in Africa as a whole. So one of the reasons why we're with ThreatCon today is because Manoj approached me and we started chatting about how can we start getting South Africa's skills, or the young guys in South Africa, guys and girls, skilled up in this domain. So one of the things that we have decided to launch, and this will go live within the next week, is essentially a CTF competition. Okay, it's based on Facebook's CTF framework. We've changed the code a little bit because it is open source, and we've changed it for the South African context. So this thing is going to go live. It's going to go out to everybody that's registered, and you're welcome to take part in it. It's going to have different quizzes. It's going to have challenges like crypto challenges. It's going to have challenges like compromise a box, capture the flag, and we'll be hosting it for the time being until the next conference, I think. And at the next conference, we'll be announcing the winners and giving them a chance to come and talk about how they got in and what they did, essentially. So a thought about this: hacking isn't a certification. It's not a qualification you can do specifically. Yeah, you can do it, but also it's theory. It's practice. It's continuously thinking out of the box and thinking with that clever, imaginative mindset. Because hacking isn't penetration testing. Penetration testing is a certification, so if you want to become a penetration tester, go for it. But if you want to hack and you want to pull together and solve problems, be a hacker. Start with this kind of thing. Solve problems around CTFs, solve problems, and this isn't the only CTF online, by the way. You can go Google a lot of them. Solve problems.
I really have to stop you now.
Okay.
Otherwise, nobody's going to get that t-shirt.
But I don't want to give t-shirts. Okay, cool. So, yeah, thank you very much.